My name is Sean Piet. I am the Student Government Association president here at this fine institution. So welcome to the Student Forum. The way that this is going to kind of look tonight is that for about the first hour to an hour and 15 minutes, we're going to ask questions that are going to be your questions that when you walked in the door, you had the option to pick up a note card. And then you can turn in up here, and our lovely speakers up here will ask the questions to our panelists, who our chancellor will introduce the panelists here in a little bit. Depending on how that goes, for about the last hour to last 45 minutes, that'll be for you to just stand up. We'll give you a mic, and then you can directly make any comments or questions or concerns to the panelists that are in the front at that time. So if any of you have any cards right now, if you could come, and Morgan over here will take the basket, and she'll come and collect the cards from you, and then we'll get started here just in a little bit. Other than that, I'm going to turn it over to our Chancellor, Bernie Pasternak.
Thank you very much. I think this one's on. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome tonight for what I guess is another student forum. We had a 4-hour, very well organized student forum about a week ago that SGA sponsored, and it literally was 4 hours. We've had 2 other campus forums, one hosted by our Chief Business Officer, Kristen Hendrickson, and then the more recent one by our Provost, Greg Summers. So we continue to want to have opportunities for people to speak, to ask questions, and to be engaged in the process. And we think by doing the cards things with the questions, that will make us a little more efficient tonight, and we can get to more questions. And if there's time, we'll try to weave in some questions that were left over from last Thursday's forum, Thursday afternoon. So I want to begin tonight by covering 2 or 3 topics for which there have been many questions, to try to get some information out about those particular issues that might facilitate the conversation tonight, that might be more focused. For example, one of the things that we've heard frequently over the last few days is a concern for a lack of transparency and involvement of everyone in this process. Let me begin by reminding us all that we've been trying to engage the campus, that'd be the faculty and the department chairs and the deans and the provost and myself, to have this conversation for the past 2 years. If you are not aware of that, or if you doubt that, I would point you towards the Provost's State of Academic Affairs address going back as far as 2014. Now, some departments have brought forward proposals, and so I think that's pretty clear that they were engaged. Typically, those proposals involved ideas that would require additional investment of funds. We saw very few, I don't think I saw any, that talked about where we could, what could we stop doing, what programs could we stop doing in order to help solve this problem, or to bring on new programs that might have a larger draw for our students. We have deliberately slowed this process down so that people could have more opportunity to be engaged. By Regents policy, we could have initiated the process 2 weeks ago and said the clock starts now, and we have 90 days. And then the clock stops, and it goes to the administration, primarily me, to make a decision and make a recommendation to the Board of Regents. We thought that would be rushing things. And so we have deliberately delayed that to no sooner than August, giving an extra 4 months or so for campus conversations, discussions, forums, just like we're doing tonight, just like we've done now 3 previous times just in the last 2 weeks. So we think adding an extra 4 months to this process will help everybody have an opportunity to be engaged, to express ideas, to come up with new ideas. That would be wonderful. And to feel like they've had at least a part in the process. We may not all agree at the end of the day about the results. That's yet to be determined, because all this conversation and debates will help inform the decisions as we move closer to August. Another area that we have frequently received questions about has to do with the new science building. How could we possibly be spending $75 million on a new science building when we're thinking about these other kind of drastic curriculum changes? Well, it's simple in that those dollars come to us from the state legislature only for a building. And we could have said no, then some other campus would have gotten a new $75 million building. Not a single penny of that would have been available to us for anything whatsoever outside building that science building. That's state law. That's the way it works in Wisconsin. So we're fortunate to have that, and we think that will help draw students here in the future. The same thing goes with the remodeling of DeBow. Absolutely, exactly the same situation. Different pots of money, but nevertheless, money that couldn't be used for anything else. The other part of that conversation, though, that not everybody will be aware of, because if you're not working in administration, you would have no reason to be. But the way we express it in Wisconsin is that not all money is green. We hear oftentimes you need to work and operate more like a business. Well, maybe so. But we have rules and restrictions that prevent us from doing just that. If we happen to have, if Al has $50,000 of revenue extra set aside end of the year carryover, the provost can't use that to buy microscopes. Those lines, those boundaries divide those pots, and you can't move funds around. Any business in the world could do that, but we can't. So that makes it pretty difficult. In the last cut, the $250 million cut, excuse me, for which we lost 25% of our state funding, we tried to apply $500,000 to that problem from program revenue. We were told we couldn't do it. We actually went to Madison in person, sat down, said, this is our plan. And they said, nope, got to come up with a different plan. Can't do that. So you see, there are serious restrictions on how we can move funds around. Another concern we've heard, and this was brought up at the SGA forum for sure, is the concerns about how this affects our initiatives concerning diversity and inclusivity. Those are good points, things that we want to think carefully about, and we already now have scheduled meetings with the Diversity Council on April the 9th, and also meetings with the SGA Inclusivity Committee for the same day, actually, April the 9th, but they'll be different meetings, different conversations. So we want to pay special attention to that, and we're looking at what the numbers actually indicate across those various disciplines. But just remember, please, that we anticipate and estimate that approximately 80% of the liberal arts courses we currently offer today will continue to be offered. So there should be ample opportunity for students, regardless of your major, to be involved in those courses for which those topics are typically emphasized. And the last area, and I already mentioned curriculum and so forth, what hasn't gotten a lot of conversation on campus yet is how could we reimagine some of these majors? Like, rather than the traditional political science, I'm just kind of almost making this up, but I think the departments have been actually talking about this. How could we reimagine the political science major into something more along public administration and global affairs? Or how could we reimagine the English major from the traditional English major to something that would be more focused on technical writing, business communications, and publishing? Publishing, I think, is particularly interesting because we have one of two student presses in the state, Madison and Stevens Point, the only two university presses. Ours is run entirely by students. That makes us one of only 6 universities in the country that have a totally student-run press. And that is great experience from how the entire publishing industry works. Mr. Provost, I'm thinking this is the two-course sequence, isn't it? It starts, of course, in the fall and in the spring as well, I believe, isn't it? To get through the process, it's a process it would have to be, because they're soliciting manuscripts, they're reviewing manuscripts, they're editing, and then they get into production and how it's printed, and then the distribution of the finished product. And it is a fantastic hands-on learning experience for our students. The things that I want us to continue to remind ourselves of is that all of our majors here at the university will continue to have a sound grounding in the liberal arts. They do now, and that will not end. That will continue. In fact, I've asked the provost and the deans to think about and look at how we can enhance that grounding even further than what we've done so far. Our improvements already in the core curriculum have resulted in a 12-point increase in our graduation rates. That means students are getting out faster, fewer bottlenecks, with still the same solid grounding in the liberal arts. That will continue. I guess that's just the simplest way to put it. All right, those are some of the common questions we've received over the last couple of weeks, and I wanted to get those out so that we could have a more maybe finer point on our conversations tonight. So I think it's time to move to the questions as we get started, and I'm going to invite our Provost Greg Summers up and our interim dean for Letters and Science, Eric Yonke, to come to the stage, and we'll get started with the questions.
Cool. Thank you, Bernie. So we have a bunch of questions up here so far, and our speakers, who I'll introduce right now, Katrina Hansen, who is the Vice President of SGA, and Braley Kerber is caucus chair for SGA as well. So if you have any additional questions and you want to write them down on a card as we're going through our questions currently, go ahead and raise your hand. The people who have the baskets and the note cards are out there somewhere. They will find you, and they will give you a note card, and then you can come turn it in at that point in time. Other than that, we will get started.
I would say that 11/13 or 11 out of 13 of the majors and programs proposed to be phased out are humanities. With that being said, why are geography and geoscience a part of this list?
When we started looking at how to reorganize the curriculum and how far the cuts had to go in terms of the College of Letters and Science, since Letters and Science has one of the biggest populations, the biggest number of programs, we really try to look across the curriculum as much as possible. We looked at the natural sciences, social sciences, the humanities, to see how the enrollments were going, how things were working. One thing that we learned pretty early on is that with geography and geology, or geography and geoscience as majors, one has enrolled about 44 majors, one has about 45 majors enrolled in it. So it kind of, we were concerned about that. We were concerned about the low enrollments in that area particularly. And so that, raised a flag. But the other part of it too that came to play very early is we've got a really great opportunity to build on the geographic information science area, and that is housed in those disciplines. And so what we need to do is look at a way that we can get resources put together to help us build up the geographic information sciences opportunities, and do that, within, the appropriate place in the college. And so that's why geography geology is in the grouping, partly because of the low enrollments, but also because there's a real opportunity there for us to really build that up. And our student demand in that area is actually very strong. I hope that answered it.
All right, I have a handful of questions here about how the restructuring of the campuses has played a role in the proposed eliminations.
I'll start, and then Greg. In the ideal world, we would tackle one and then the other, but time is not on our side. We have a structural deficit here that we can't wait any longer to deal with, and those other campuses do as well. Matter of fact, their situation is significantly more serious than ours is here. So that, I'll leave it at that. But that means that the two issues get conflated, and we have to figure out both the restructuring and the curriculum at the same time. Not ideal, but the budget crisis puts us in that situation. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what exactly to add to that. As the Chancellor indicated in his opening remarks, we've been talking about the need to restructure our curriculum here for several years, many years actually, long before anybody dreamt that the colleges would be reorganized, with that announcement last fall. So that kind of landed in our lap unexpectedly, as it did everybody's. But to the Chancellor's point, given the financial situation that we're inheriting from the colleges and given the role of the associate degree in their curriculum and how that's going to blend here, it makes it even more important that we look hard at our entire curriculum and make sure that those things are blended well together. So there are certainly curricular issues and financial issues that make that, I think, even more imperative that we deal with this together simultaneously.
The next question I have here is, why can we afford 2 new master's programs as well as a doctorate program if we cannot afford all of the existing programs we already have?
Others can jump in here, but I'll start. One of the things that we started talking about literally a year ago was the need to restructure our curriculum, and that would mean both eliminating some programs, but also investing in some programs, some other programs at the same time. The Chancellor likes to say, and maybe he can speak to this, that you cannot cut your way to success. That's kind of a misguided strategy that this university has unfortunately been pursuing for too many years. We get a budget cut or we fall short in revenue somehow and we cut to the next July. We just got to make it to the end of the fiscal year and we do whatever cutting and of supplies or equipment or staffing or whatever just to survive to that budget. And we actually are not looking forward. We're not looking 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road to try and think about strategically how do we need to position the university so that we can weather these kinds of financial issues if and when they come up. And I think that's a short-sighted strategy. We need to be looking 5, 10 years down the road. But that means investing at the same time that you're cutting. So to some extent, we have overcut some parts of the campus in order to invest in other parts. And again, we've been talking about the need to do that and the fact that we were planning to do that and that we had to craft a plan to do that for literally at least the last year.
Yeah, I would just add, Greg, that when you think about the business world, what big company have you not heard of that at some point is talking about restructuring and maybe even layoffs, and then some other time in their history they're talking about bringing out new products and new product lines. It's pretty much the same thing here. We can't cut our way to prosperity for sure, but we have to be willing to reinvest at the same time we're making other changes, in this case in the curriculum.
All right, the next question is, how long before the proposed cuts show benefit to the university, and how much will the proposed cuts save, and how much will they be adding, or how much cost will they be adding?
I think that's a complicated question to answer. It kind of depends on the program that you're talking about. In some cases, and you have to remember, part of the budget adjustment that we're doing, a large part of the budget adjustment we're doing, has nothing to do with the proposed major eliminations. We've been making budget adjustments literally every year. We do this all the time. That's routine. So if we have an enrollment decline, sometimes we won't fill a position that comes open in a particular department that doesn't necessitate eliminating a major. We just don't fill a position, and the department lives with one fewer faculty member. Or sometimes we add positions to departments where the enrollment is justified. We do that all the time. And so that is still very much a part of the conversation this year as well. The proposed eliminations, if you just look at the 13 departments that are affected by this in one way, shape, or form, and remember, when we're cutting a major, we're not cutting the whole department. It's just actually a small piece of the resources and the staff that goes into that particular curriculum. We're figuring that's going to be around $1.5 million that we might save from those proposed eliminations. Out of a $4.5 million structural deficit, that's only a small piece, and so we've been working all year on other pieces of that, and those decisions have been sort of ongoing and will continue to be ongoing. So I hope that helps to address that. In the case of, the elimination of, say, a tenure track staff position, some of those we've had to let go of this year. Those savings can accrue within a few months, particularly if the person gets another job and they leave the university. In the case of a tenure position, if any of our recommendations come to that, that's going to be more like June of 2020. That's sort of the farthest possible date. And so as part of this, we've been talking about the need to look for bridge funding and to kind of stretch out our timeline as much as we can to get some of those savings. But it's a variety of strategies and a variety of decisions that are all part of a larger plan.
Yeah, the timeline for this, just to remind us all, discussion now, input now, forums now, all the way through the rest of this semester and into the summer. Some sort of official conclusion by the university in August that says, here's what we think we really need to recommend to the Board of Regents. Then the committee is appointed through the shared governance process. That deliberates for 3 months. That pretty much takes care of the fall semester this coming year. So something wouldn't be in front of the regents until the spring semester of next year. And then if there are layoffs of tenured faculty, then they would have a year's notice. So it's a 2-year process. And in some regards, that's a good thing because it makes it deliberate and thoughtful. You just don't rush into something. And of course, if somebody's going to be laid off, they certainly need a reasonable amount of time to notice of that. So those savings wouldn't accrue till almost 2 years from now.
All right, I'm going to combine these two questions together. How have other UW colleges handled their budget costs? Sorry. How have other UW colleges handled their budget cuts? How does this compare to your proposed plan? And why does UWSP seem to be struggling more than the other universities?
Let me start.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, you can. Last biennium, when the system cut, the legislature cut $250 million from the budget. Remember, that's $500 million over the last 15 years. But in the last biennium, UW Stevens Point had the largest percent of any campus cut. The largest percent of our state funding was cut. We had the reports from all the campuses. We had the biggest piece. That was 25% of our state funding. So we were already kind of behind the 8 ball. Secondly, we're in a rural part of the state, not unlike Superior, where the demographics have hit us even harder. And third, remember, we're the only campus that has increased the 4-year graduation rate by 12 points. That means there are fewer seniors, fewer juniors, and fewer sophomores because they're getting through faster. So it's a perfect storm. To answer the part of the question that said why we seem to be struggling more than the other campuses, those would be several reasons why that's the case. And some of it is actually good news. The graduation rate is certainly good news for students. So what was the other part of the question?
The two parts were how have other UW schools handled their budget cuts? How does it compare to ours? And then
yes.
Why do we seem to be struggling more?
Yeah, okay. So I've answered the second part already. As you probably have read now in the media here and there, Superior last year announced the deactivation of 25 programs. We understand other campuses are struggling equally, or maybe not equally, but significantly. Oshkosh has something like a $9 million budget problem there. It makes our 4.5 sound manageable. And their foundation has declared bankruptcy for reasons that have been in the news for now 2 years, or almost 2 years. The typical way of dealing with it, and the way most institutions do it because it's a lot easier, is just across the board reduction. Everybody gets a 10% reduction. The provost talked about this at his forum on Thursday afternoon, and that's the way we've done it here. We've done it that way here for years because we've had a lot of experience in doing that. But it comes to a point where you can't do that any longer because it makes every program on campus weaker. The way the provost put it is it introduces academic and budgetary anemia to the entire campus. And so we just get weaker and weaker as an institution. And at some point, we have to be more strategic than that. And that's what this proposal represents. Greg?
Yeah, I'm glad that the Chancellor mentioned the graduation rate, because I think people lose sight of that all the time. Had we not improved our graduation rate, we would probably still be a campus that had probably 1,000 more students in it. And all of the revenue that we'd be collecting from the juniors and seniors who were stuck, not getting classes they wanted and taking 5.5 years to graduate, would be benefiting the university financially. I don't feel that that's ethical, but that's where we were about 6 years ago. So the fact that we've dramatically increased our graduation rate, it just came at a financially really terrible time. But, I'm not going to feel bad about that, because that's good for students. That's our job. The other thing that I would say about why our situation is a little bit more acute is that we have been talking about the need to do this for years, and we haven't acted. Some other campuses have actually dealt with this over a period of years, and they're able to do it more gradually and less dramatically, and they frankly stayed out of the headlines because of it. UW-Milwaukee is a good example. Their enrollment 5 or 6 years ago was something like 31,000 or something like that. They've dropped now to 26,000, I think. I might have my numbers just a little bit off, but it's something like that. They've eliminated 50 or 60 positions across campus. They've cut programs. They just haven't quite done it in the dramatic way that we've had to, because we're right up on a financial precipice. They've taken more time to do that. And so the fact that our campus has known about these issues for a long time and simply has not wanted to address them, I think, is a part of that issue that we're dealing with now.
All right, my next question here, and I'm combining a couple of them, but they're all focused around professors starting to leave the university because of the announcement of the cuts. So do you expect to see the quality of education being harmed because of tenured faculty leaving?
It's something that we certainly are going to have to track. I don't think that will happen. And this is sort of an unfortunate fact about the job market if you're a PhD, the nation's institutions of higher education that are degree granting produce far too many PhDs than there are tenure track jobs for. And that's a really unfortunate and I think irresponsible reality of the higher education world, but it's true. So I recognize that the disruptions that this causes here may cause some people to become frustrated with their roles here and may cause people to leave. But we will absolutely be committed to hiring quality PhD faculty members. Some of the concern that I've heard from faculty worry about us converting to a bunch of part-time adjuncts. And we have no desire to do that. This campus has always avoided that, has always sought to avoid that as a matter of campus culture. We believe in putting trained, appropriately credentialed faculty members in front of students because that's the educational experience we want to deliver, and we're absolutely committed to continuing that. Eric?
Yeah, what I want to add was for you in the years you've been here, you may have noticed, or maybe you haven't, but there's been a real morale problem for the faculty, and it's been going on for a long time. And it's part of the whole struggle we've had all these years of budget cut after budget cut after budget cut. And we're at a point where we need to kind of get ourselves reorganized, regrouped, and re-energized. And a lot of the faculty, we're talking about that. Is how can we now step forward? What can we do? Give us some leadership on how to move forward so that we can start the process. And so I see March 5th, and then kind of putting the document out there as a real kind of a shock to the system. It's hard as we kind of sort this out and begin a process, but it's also a chance for us to really kind of get moving and really help to get through that morale, I don't know what you call it, it's kind of like an iceberg we've been caught in for a long time. And I would add, I think too that I really want to hand it to our faculty who for all these years have been really struggling, and, watching these budget cuts, how they have always done everything in their power to just really insulate their students from having to see it, from having to see it happen or affect their classes. I think the faculty have done a really tremendous job. And so really part of what's motivating this is the need for us to really kind of regroup, restructure, and hopefully really kind of get beyond that, that place where we just have been so stuck because of the constant cutting that we've been experiencing.
Yeah, I have to say I went around to lots of departments a year ago at this time through, I think it was February, March, and April, visiting a lot of departments to talk about our budget situation. The hardest and worst and most aggressive conversations I had were in departments that had been, cut year after year after year when they had all kinds of growth potential. I mean, the meeting I had in the College of Natural Resources with the faculty, they basically said, make decisions already. Get it done. You're not leading. We are constantly, tired of dealing with budget cut after budget cut. We need to get on top of this. I heard the same thing from the health sciences. Make decisions. Get it done. Stop waffling. That was the blunt message I heard from those programs, because they know they can grow. They know their students are there waiting to be served, and that hospitals and clinics and all kinds of things are out there waiting to have our graduates cross the stage. And here we are tying their hands financially because we're not dealing with the problem that we have as an institution. That was absolutely the clear message that I got repeatedly from some of those programs. So that speaks exactly to the morale question that Eric is alluding to, that if we can get on top of the budget situation, we have financial stability, the morale of our campus is going to improve.
Let me anticipate a question that's so related to the one that was just asked. So I want to speak to it while we're here and have the same context for the conversation. The question was about about faculty leaving and having qualified faculty in the classroom. I've been asked as recently as this afternoon, visiting with an alum, well, if we don't have majors in history or political science or the others, how are we going to attract good faculty to come and be a part of what we're doing here? And I think there's two parts to that question. One, that means it's on us to make sure we design an educational experience that's not only exceptional for the students, but also attractive to future faculty that come here. And that's our challenge, and I think we can do that together. And secondly, let me just share an observation that I've kind of accumulated over some now 40 plus years in higher education. I spent 17 years in the classroom. And we just, as an academy, I don't mean Stevens Point, I don't mean Wisconsin, I mean across the country, in the academy in general, we have framed our work to be around the major. And general education was just kind of a have-to chore we have to do, somebody's got to do it, whose turn is it? And it's been seen as the second level, not as good as teaching in the major. And what a disservice that approach does to the vast majority of students. Boy, where we should really be pushing the liberal arts and exposure would be the 8,000 students that are out there. And shouldn't our focus be on those general education requirements? A faculty member said to me recently, so we're just going to be relegated to just teaching in the core. That's what we should be celebrating, I think, as an academy, because that's where you get to talk to that county major about history and why that is so important. And we don't approach it that way. I don't mean just here. I mean across the academy in general. And we need to change that conversation. And so maybe that change in that conversation, maybe that starts here.
With faculty leaving, either by choice or because of these changes, how can we guarantee that there will be enough classes offered for students to finish their programs, especially if 20% of the humanities are going away?
So one thing that's important is as we're doing our planning, we're being very careful to make sure that everybody understands we are committed to making sure whatever program a student starts in, that they'll be able to finish it. And what that means is we got to be very conscientious to make sure we staff those and make sure we staff them well. As the Chancellor mentioned a little bit earlier, if you look at the process and how long it's going to take, we're already working on budgets a few years out already, and we're already looking at making sure that we're offering contracts for assistant professors, for instance, for 2019, 2020. Okay, so we're talking about a kind of a horizon that's out there a bit, and we're really trying to be very careful to make sure that we take care of our students. And I think it kind of goes back to what I mentioned about the way I think our faculty are. Our faculty are, they're that committed. We're going to take care of you. I think the faculty are definitely going to take care of us all and do what needs to be done to make sure we can offer those courses to complete the degree in a timely manner.
but not just the degree. The general education requirements are going to be required. So we don't want to go back to the days of bottlenecks, because when I first got here and when Greg first became provost, we were getting calls from parents and advisors and students saying, I can't get this class, I can't get that class. We don't want to go back to that. And so we will be retaining sufficient faculty to cover the classes that we need to cover. It would be great to have the problem of, we need to open another section, Dean.
I'm good with that problem.
Yeah, you're good with that problem. Okay.
All right. This next set of questions, one of them comes from a teacher in the Stevens Point area high school teaching seniors in U.S. history and geography. And they want to know what should they tell their students and their own sons when they ask where they should be going to school and if they should consider UWSP. For years, they've done everything to convince students to come to UWSP. But will that continue to be the truth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a fine institution. And although there's been plenty said in social media recently about you're turning into a trade school and you're turning into a tech school, that is absolutely not the case. Absolutely. If my daughter was of the age going to college, she's out now, I'd want her to go here. I'd want my granddaughters to go here. No doubt about it. What we're going to be able to do here is to make sure every student has two things. One, a sound grounding and understanding and working knowledge in the liberal arts. And also a path towards a career that he or she wants to pursue. And the ability with that means flexibility in those careers, because you're going to change jobs for sure. Then make sure you have the skills that allows you to be flexible if you graduate, get a job, and 3 years later think, I think I want to make an adjustment. We want to make sure you're prepared to do that.
Just to that, to put a fine point on that, I've heard lots of statements that, you can't be a university if you don't offer a major in X, fill in the blank. It is a true statement now that most UWs do not offer every single major. I mean, I think if you look up and down the list of majors that we have proposed for elimination, those are not offered on every single UW campus now, right now, and that's always been true. So, I don't want to sugarcoat the thing that we're losing, right? If you are determined to major in history, and that is your dream, 2 years from now, that may not be possible here, and that's something that we won't offer at the major level. That doesn't mean we won't offer the ability to study history in a meaningful way. Probably in major, programs of an interdisciplinary nature, but not a full-fledged major in the discipline of history. So will we lose that thing? Yes. But will there still be robust, meaningful, deeply engaging opportunities to work with history, PhDs in the study of history? Yes. And I think that speaks to the Chancellor's point.
The next part of this question is, have you spoken to admissions and enrollment about how this might already be affecting the numbers for the next academic school year?
Yeah, we have. We ask actually almost every day, I believe. So far, what we're told is that nobody has called to say they are withdrawing their application. I don't think that there's a single instance of that I'm aware of. We have gotten some phone calls in the admission office. I think the number was around 30 of just questions and concerns and just information gathering, but they've been a relatively small number. So we are tracking that, absolutely. And again, to kind of go back to the data we had gathered, I think it's a week old now. If you look at all the students in our currently accepted pool of students, the number who would be directly affected by that, at least with what they've told us their intended major is about 3.6% of that applicant pool. So again, it's not insignificant, it's not trivial, but it's a relatively small number of students that we're talking about.
I got an email just a few days ago from a prospective parent, and she wrote such a compelling piece that I asked if I could call her, and I did. And she said, we saw the news recently, but we already had a trip planned to come visit with our son, and some friends were coming with them with their son or daughter. So that we made the trip anyway. We came and she said after we left, we loved the place. We liked the faculty that we met. We liked the staff were so considerate, thoughtful, everything. They had thought of everything that we needed to be talking about. The facilities look great. This is exactly where my son wants to go. But he wants to major in history. And he's only a junior in high school. And so he's not making the grandfather calls. But they were so taken with the place, they're not writing us off. They're going to continue to follow the discussions, and I've invited them to be in contact with me again, or with anybody here at the university and with the admissions office. So they were so taken with what they saw when they got here and when they got the feel of walking onto campus and the people they met. That's what's going to continue to draw the students, I think.
Except for graphic design, if the arts are getting cut, what will happen to the arts accreditation that was recently renewed, and where will graphic design be if it's not a BFA?
Well, that's a conversation that we have to have with NASAD, the accrediting body for the art and design program. We have looked hard at the accrediting standards. The BFA in graphic design is a part of the currently accredited program, as is interior architecture, a BFA that NASAD accredits. So we actually are fairly optimistic about our ability to maintain accreditation from that organization. It will continue to be a degree in the arts. It is absolutely a degree in the arts. And the department and the dean and the chair are having conversations about how specifically to elevate that particular program to the status of a full-fledged major. Remember, right now it is an option within the general BFA in art. They want to turn that, and have long planned to turn that into a full-fledged major, because it comprises about half the enrollment. Among 5 options that they have in art, graphic design is about half the enrollment. So the other 4 options are all quite low enrolled. And so that's, again, the rationale behind the recommendation. But I'm relatively confident that we'll be able to maintain that accreditation.
All right, this next question is about all of the proposed cuts to teaching subjects. How will the teaching certification for that be affected? And have you looked into the DPI requirements for it?
Okay, so one thing that we were really careful to look at in the whole mix is to preserve our teaching certifications. Okay, so we are looking at absolutely maintaining the teaching ability for, in be able to get certified as a history teacher, to get certified as English education. All of the ones that we currently offer in teaching certification, we're planning on keeping. What's kind of lost in the fog, I would say, the last week is, and again, this is partly on us. I mean, I totally understand that. Is that what is the first reaction to the document is that all of these things are getting completely wiped out, which is not the case. We're planning on keeping, as again, all of our students take historical perspectives, for instance. So we need historians, we need to teach history, and we want to create history educators as well. So we're planning on keeping that going. We are in very close conversations with the folks in the School of Education in terms of what the DPI requirements are. There's a lot of questions flying back and forth right now. We've been, working a lot with the English department, saying, well, how do we do English? And, because the English major is very closely tied to the English education certification. Good question. We're definitely going to be working on that. We definitely want to keep all those certifications going, but we just need to make sure we're being kind of openly honest about what it is that we need to do to make sure we're doing those certifications, and not to conflate everything into one, one size fits all. And I guess I would add to that too. We fully intend to offer humanities types degrees and courses here. They're going to look different, and we understand that we are going through some downsizing and we're having to consolidate. But I'm really kind of asking everybody to kind of think, and when they're talking to everybody, realize it's not an either or. It's not completely black or white. It's not like we decide we're not having a history major, therefore there's going to be no history. We're not having a philosophy major, there's no philosophy. It's really more, we're looking at and talking with the faculty about what are some things that we could build. You know, we'll definitely want to keep, for instance, a history minor. We want to keep the museum studies minor. You know, we want to keep philosophy. Could students study history and literature, for instance? I mean, there are things that we can do that I think are going to work actually really well. And in some respects, one thing that I always found so encouraging was how many students double and triple major. I don't know if you've noticed, but we'll have a lot of really good students who will say, I'm doing a language major, and I'm doing international studies, and I'm doing history, for instance. Well, one of the reasons they can do that is because there's a lot of courses that apply all the way across all three of those major degree areas. We've got some room, therefore, to really help consolidate and collaborate with having to do this downsizing we have to face.
The other thing I would maybe add about the DPI is that the DPI certification standards are actually undergoing quite a bit of scrutiny right now, and I'm expecting that there may be some significant changes in how teachers are certified in the state. Some of those changes are being driven by DPI themselves as they look to help particularly small town school districts to deal with staffing shortages of their own. But some of the changes are actually coming from within higher education, and I know the state of Wisconsin and the UW system is looking at models that are being used elsewhere in other states intended to kind of streamline the certification of teachers and to actually improve the training of teachers and the satisfaction of those graduates as they move from college into the classroom. We're tracking all of those changes really carefully. Those conversations have been ongoing, and they're starting to kind of escalate a little bit at the UW system. And so, to the dean's point, we're really trying to track that as carefully as we can and to make sure we preserve as many of those pathways as we can.
I have a number of questions here related to the timeline of events. Specifically, students are going into advising right now, and there's a concern that the classes they're signing up for now might not be available for next year's curriculum, as well as since the approval isn't happening until August, why will a lot of is it possible that decisions will be made during the summer when students aren't present, as well as, since this is only a proposition, but it seems that student input is irrelevant, and wondering if there's anything students can do, especially with a lot of the decisions being made when there aren't as many students around.
Well, I'll take a piece of it and then see if anybody else wants to respond. The soonest that any program would be discontinued formally, by a Board of Regent vote is probably next February or March. So the idea that students this spring, as they look to register for next year, would need to be concerned is just not the case. We are going to have essentially the same curriculum next year as we have this year, with all the usual adjustments for enrollment that we make every year. But nothing is changing or going away for next fall. And certainly no decisions are going to be made over the summer when students aren't here. That was the whole point of delaying the process, because we wanted the committee to be up and running over the summer and doing its work, the faculty committee, but we want them to be prepared to engage campus stakeholders, students, faculty, and staff across campus once folks return in the fall. We don't want any formal decisions, going down to the board until late next fall semester. So I don't think that you need to worry that somehow everything's going to change and courses are going to disappear over the summer.
I just want to emphasize there, Greg, that the decision to be made in August is not whether to do this or not do that. That, as far as the campus decision, that doesn't come until the end of fall semester. That's the decision point on whether we're going to send this to the regents or not. That's the end of fall semester. The decision in August will be just to implement the regents policy 2004, which lays out the process of discontinuing academic programs. So that decision in August will be to move to the next step in the process or to not. But the final decision would be, on the campus final decision, would be probably late November, early December.
All right, next I have a handful of questions here about things happening on a state legislative level and whether or not Chancellor Patterson and Provost Summers plan on lobbying on behalf of the UW system and fund the freeze for the students here.
A vast majority of my time is spent off campus doing just that, whether it's from this particular issue or any other issue before the state legislature. That's what we do in the Chancellor's office. So yes, the answer is absolutely yes. We have been in regular contact with legislators already on this particular issue in the last 2 weeks, calling them, answering questions, talking about what the needs are. So the short answer is absolutely, we will continue to do that for this campus.
And I don't get off the campus as much as the chancellor does, but every time I get a chance, which is like every day for the last several years, to talk about our budget, I make the point that the lack of public funding is at the root of most of the struggles of this university and others in this state and many other states. I mean, you just can't escape that fundamental reality. We treat education in this country too much as a private good whose benefit accrues to the individuals, not to society. That's true. You get a college degree, you benefit personally. And so the argument goes, well, you should pay the majority of the cost. I don't buy that. That's just not the case. I mean, yes, you get a private benefit, but the society as a whole benefits from your education. You walk out the door and you're a trained engineer, or you're a health professional, or you're a counselor in the schools, the whole world benefits from that, right? And it's true in every metric you can find, every statistic you can quote, the world is a better place the more educated we are, period. That means, to me, it's a public good. But let's also be honest that, you know, this has eroded over decades. It's not fair to point to one party, frankly. It is a societal issue. Our public funding has been eroding on this campus since 1972, when the system was first formed. We had 50% of our budget coming from state taxpayer money in those years. Tuition was free. Free. Right? Now, state taxpayer dollars are 13, 15%, something like that of our budget, and you all know what you pay in tuition, right? When you could, I think I haven't looked at this stat for a while, but in the 1970s, if you were a family that was in the lowest 20% of, median incomes, and you had to send a child to college, that cost you about 42% of your family income to afford to send one child to college. So it was a big lift, but it was doable. By 2011, 12, last time I looked at this, that same family in the lowest 20% of incomes, it cost you about 120% of your annual income to send a child to college. Think about the difference. I mean, that was not just a lift. That was painful, and it hurt, and maybe you couldn't do it. You certainly couldn't do it without borrowing a lot of money and saddling yourself with debt for decades. That's the world we live in, and I don't think it's right. So we absolutely make that case all the time.
The provost frames this very well. The issue of public good versus private good in getting a higher education. That's a conversation and a debate the state has not engaged in a public way. Most states have not engaged in it in a public way. We should, as a state, do just that. And I come down on it the same side as the provost, that while it is a personal good, you're going to make roughly $1 million more in your lifetime than the high school graduate. Those are national statistics. It's out there. But there's so much more to the public good, and the state benefits by having a higher educated populace than if we don't. You can look at the Chancellor's webpage. You'll find an article that we published this past year on the public good of higher education. And people are healthier, less demands on health care, less demands on the welfare system, less demands on the criminal justice system, greater engagement in the community, greater support for charities and nonprofits, vote more often. There's a whole list of things that speak to the public good of higher education. So I think we probably all would pretty much agree with that.
With a proposed emphasis on focusing on student hireability, has there been any discussion about how or if these proposed cuts could affect the future for UWSP alumni? Specifically, if majors are cut, should alumni from those majors worry about their futures?
The worth of your degree hanging on that wall is important to every alum. That's because students and alums have a special relationship to this institution. Very different than faculty and staff who come and go, and administrators who come and go, and certainly chancellors who come and go. The difference is you are always an alum. So it is really important to you as an alum as to the worth of that degree hanging on the wall. So I can say to you tonight, we're proposing these ideas, these changes, to make sure to underscore the worth of that degree going forward. Because they're not talking about whether you majored in history or political science. It's the reputation of the institution. It's how we're seen, as UW-Stevens Point, in Madison and in Chicago and in Washington, D.C., and we have students from all those places. It's the reputation of the institution that we're trying to safeguard here. And our whole purpose in all of this is to make this institution more sustainable and more financially responsible, and a place that is vibrant, serves students well, and produces great graduates. That's how you value the worth of that degree 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
All right. Next question. Through the strategic action items provided by the Inclusivity Committee beginning in spring of 2017, students have been asking for diversity curriculum in the Gen Ed core, from Common Reads in English 150 to social justice topics in Com 101. We have seen zero progress, and we were told directly that they would not be introduced to Common Council. The proposed cut not only affects the content that provides skills to create inclusive spaces, but significantly affects the recordable diversity on our campus and faculty and students. What is your plan to address our campus that is already struggling to maintain inclusive spaces?
Well, I'll start, and then maybe Eric wants to jump in. I don't disagree that the curriculum right now is inadequate for, from an inclusivity perspective. And in fact, when I was a faculty member on the committee that helped to design the current general education program, we argued in the strongest possible terms that it was inappropriate, inadequate, insufficient, use whatever word you want, to create a diversity requirement that was comprised of one 3-credit class. Because we knew at the time, we had lots of evidence to suggest that that was not an adequate requirement. Particularly when it was a random class that students picked from a menu of 30 options that, you know, might be narrowly focused, might be broadly focused, you know, you didn't know. We wanted to see diversity, inclusivity integrated across the entire, what we now think of as the investigation level of our Gen Ed curriculum. We thought, well, why shouldn't every class have some required component to deal with inclusivity? And we put that proposal forward. And it was roundly rejected by the faculty of this campus for a variety of reasons. Faculty that didn't currently teach inclusivity in their curricula argued that they didn't want to be asked to do it. Faculty that did do it argued that they were the only ones qualified to do it. And those two stakeholder groups pretty much were the majority of the campus. And it went nowhere. So we have the diversity requirement that we do in our general education program. And I think, to the Chancellor's point, one of the things we want to do as part of this curricular reimagining is to go back and look hard at that Gen Ed curriculum and go back and take another crack at it. Because I do think there are ways in which we could make inclusivity a much more robust component of the curriculum. Now, I think the question also relates to the number of humanities courses and majors, and because those often carry some of the weight of inclusivity, we absolutely want to preserve that, that component. And I think Eric maybe has some more detailed thoughts about how to do that.
Yeah, we were very careful in looking at the curriculum to, in a sense, protect and hopefully promote what we have currently in inclusivity and diversity courses, and if anything, we want to try to build them up. The Women and Gender Studies program, for instance, is doing very well. You know, we want to see it expanded. One idea that we've been batting around is if we were to put together some different majors in the humanities, you know, might we require, for instance, to put in, you know, take this minor, you know, in Women and Gender Study, for instance, or other diversity options that kind of get built in. So we're trying to take a really careful look at how to expand inclusivity and diversity in the curriculum. We're also trying to take a very close look at what impact these decisions on these majors might have on our students of color, or, you know, our students from diverse backgrounds. And we're trying to track them carefully and make sure that if we do anything we're not pushing really another sort of level of struggle on this campus for folks who are really doing their best to get what they can from Stevens Point. So we really are trying to be sensitive to that, both in a curricular fashion, but also be careful and think about what it is we do as a whole sort of a campus.
I have a series of questions here having to do with student involvement. What are you going to do to ensure students have a voice and a vote for these proposed cuts? This question has been asked multiple times with absolutely no answer from any of the men this evening. What can students do to prevent this, if anything? Would you be open to creating a committee chaired by a neutral party that contains faculty, staff, and students from each college to create a counterproposal? Would the university or SGA be willing to hold a student referendum on these proposed changes? And is there any possibility of a roundtable or open conversation between administrators and students, because we get lectured at all day? So I will repeat those if any of those are missed.
Let me start and I'll let these guys take over. I just want to say that one of the things I've been talking to the chairs of the departments about is that it might make more sense for us to organize meetings of students in majors, and so organize them more at a department level so that they're kind of smaller groups. They can speak more to, students can speak more to the things that they know from their experience in that particular discipline or that department. And I'm hoping we can kind of get those rolling. I put the idea out there about a month or so ago, actually, before all this came up, with the faculty chairs, so I'm hoping we can get back from spring break and get some of those kind of smaller, more focused group conversations going in the College of Letters and Science.
I'll try to speak to several of those things. I'll go back to the presentation I gave last week, and the whole framing of that presentation was to put this in the hands of the faculty, staff, and students and the community of this campus. When I talked to the campus a year ago about the challenges that we had, and we were looking at a $7 million structural deficit a year ago at this time, right? We chopped $2 million of that off last spring to get down to where we're at, but we had a significant, looming, serious crisis on this campus. What I said was, it's my responsibility as a provost to put a plan in place a year from then. So I pointed to this March and I said, my job is to gather as much input as I can over the coming year, but come March, I've got to put a plan in place. So that's what we did. We got as much input as we could. We put a plan in place. But now it's really up to the campus to look for alternatives. And the whole presentation I gave Thursday was about looking at those alternatives. Look hard at those alternatives. That's the whole point. That's what governance exists to do. And that's what, these campus conversations. We live in a campus. This isn't a corporation. We invite input. I welcome that, particularly alternatives. Because what we can't do is just refuse to do something. We can't just do nothing. And so if the thrust of the input that we get is, hell no, we've got to stop this no matter what, that's not going to solve the problem. We have to solve the problem. And I would prefer to do that collectively, together, collaboratively, but it can't just be no. Right? And again, the campus culture here, and I can say this from long experience, has a history of simply saying no. That's why we're in this position today, and we didn't solve this 5 years ago. Because believe me, I've been talking about this for close to 7 years now. I have been calling on people to help me solve this for close to 7 years, and all I've ever gotten, frankly, is no. And that works for a while, but we're kind of out of money. So we have to solve this. The other thing I want to say is about the governance process here, because our hands are somewhat tied. The region policy, for whatever reason, we didn't write it here. This was written at the system level, calls for a faculty committee. And so when our governance group tried to write local policy to implement this, their first instinct was to say, yeah, we want university staff, we want academic staff, we want students on this committee. And they were told, in no uncertain terms, by System Legal, the attorneys who are helping us to interpret policy, that was not allowed. So I wish, it was different. I wish we could change that, but that is the policy that we have to follow. Now, what our governance groups are trying to do is to mandate that this faculty committee, which has the formal responsibility of exploring alternatives and perhaps proposing one or several, that they are mandated to reach out to other stakeholder groups. And so they are absolutely, in the local policy, going to be mandated to reach out to academic staff, university staff, and students, not just in a governance sense, but broadly as they can. Which, again, is why we want that group to work when the whole campus is here, not over the summer, so they can actually do that kind of outreach. So within the constraints of region policy, we absolutely want people to be involved, and we absolutely want to hear about alternatives. We have put the best proposal forward that we were able to come up with the input that we were able to gather. But now's the time to chew on it, come up with alternatives, figure things out, and hopefully to work on that collaboratively with us to come up with a really good plan by the time we have to deal with this next fall.
Yes, I'll just underscore that we'll get much better ideas about alternative courses of action if more people are involved. But the provost is right. If the only feedback is, hell no, don't do this, then that doesn't move the needle at all. But your question, this particular question is very timely tonight, because I spent the better part of today talking to the chair of the Common Council, to the chair of the faculty committee, and to System Legal about this very point of the committee that's formed in August or September is faculty only. And we were desperately trying to find some way around that, and we keep hitting the same brick wall that the Regents policy, and you can look it up, it's 20-04, says faculty committee. I'm very deeply disturbed about that because, of course, I understand why it's there. It's because they're the ones going to be laid off. Now, university staff could say, well, I'm the administrative assistant in that department. I might get laid off too. That's true. But the impact on faculty is far greater. Academic staff, the impact on academic staff is less so. But I think you can make a really strong argument that in addition to the faculty, the people that are most impacted are students. And to me, it just doesn't make any sense that they're not part of that conversation. So we're going to force the situation to make sure that students are part of the conversation on this campus. And your voice will be heard because we're going to make doggone sure that it is. Regardless, that it may not be a voting member on the committee itself because Regents policy is actually preventing that from happening. But just know that the process the provost just described is going to fully embrace students' input and conversations between now and the end of the fall semester next year.
Will that faculty-only meeting be on public record and have minutes and be open to anyone who wishes to attend?
Yes, there will be. They will have to abide by the open records, open meetings regulations for sure.
Okay. And then I have a follow-up about the idea of the smaller meetings with departments and majors. Will there also be opportunities for students who have majors that are relatively unaffected?
Sure, I actually asked all the departments to do it. So I actually would like them to kind of get the students together for listening sessions. The one thing I was worried about was, as you had mentioned before, you guys get lectured at all day long. So I want to see, hopefully we can ensure that we create a situation where it's not the faculty lecturing at students, but students get to talk as broadly as possible and we just listen.
And then the follow-up is it's Regent Policy 2024, if anybody wants to look that up.
All right. My next set of questions here are about some of the programs that we have at the university. So instead of hitting any majors, why not hit the sports and extracurricular programs? Why is DeBow being redone? And in FY15, the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning was closed because there wasn't a sufficient budget to sustain it. In FY17, CITL was reopened, giving the idea that the budget situation has improved. Please explain why the center will continue to receive the budget.
I'll take the teaching center question first, and then maybe somebody else sitting over there can talk about the other side of the question. The CITL, the Teaching Center, Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning, wasn't actually a thing before. It was a different teaching center. We had a teaching center for a number of years. It had a different acronym, a different name. And it never really had a budget. It lasted for about 6 years. It always had a temporary director. It literally had an interim director for I think its entire 6 years. It never had a permanent budget underneath it. It was never a terribly robust thing. And one of the decisions that I made, I don't know how many years ago now, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, was to close that in a previous and earlier budget cut because it was one of the few pieces of budget I could get access to deal with a particular cut. Now, we immediately at that time decided I decided personally, and as a campus, we decided that we were going to try to kind of take the ashes of that teaching center and see if we couldn't remake a much better teaching center, and particularly one that had a mission of inclusivity. I mean, this goes right to the inclusivity question that we had earlier. That's a Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning. And what we did is we partnered with Al Thompson, our Chief Diversity Officer, and we talked to the Inclusivity Committee, and we tried to reimagine from the ground up in a kind of strategic planning process what we needed in terms of professional development to truly make this place, particularly as a teaching institution, a place that took inclusivity seriously. And we needed that kind of, the students who participated in that process, and there were a lot of students, argued strongly to create a teaching center for faculty, because a lot of the tensions that exist around inclusivity obviously percolate up in the classroom. That's one of the things we heard most clearly from students, is if there are problems on this campus, the majority of them are taking place in interactions, not just professor to student in classrooms, but student to student in classrooms, in the context of talking about all kinds of difficult issues in a variety of different classes. And so the idea of having that professional development center here on campus with a focus on inclusivity was literally something we heard from the campus. And so we carved out budget a couple of years ago from lots of different sources, and we put a base budget for the first time in this campus's history for decades, I think, under a teaching center. And we launched it, and we have an outstanding director. She has this year single-handedly traveled around. I think she's had something like close to 45, maybe 50 training sessions with department faculty around campus and various units around campus, starting the process of inclusivity training that the students themselves asked for. So when I heard earlier that we haven't done anything on inclusivity, I'm disheartened by that, because we've done a lot, particularly responding directly to the concerns that we heard from the Student Inclusivity Committee. That training is undergoing. It was at the top of the list that students demanded, frankly, and they were right to do so. And we've responded to that. And that's all taking place through the Teaching Center.
And just to touch on what Greg is saying, I think the work we've done with the CITL, with the new teaching center and inclusivity is very powerful. We're making great strides in that area. But let me talk about the other part of the question. The other question was about athletics and also DeBow. And the chancellor already have alluded to this. This is really different sets of pots of money. For DeBow is all program revenue money. So in reality, the state bonds us the money. We don't have $16 million laying around. The state bonds us the money to do the renovation. And that building was built in the late 50s, early 60s. So it's time for a renovation to have that building be up to speed to this generation. And so if we didn't do the project, we just would have had DeBow look the way they are, but the $16.8 million would not be here at all to do the renovation. As for athletics, great topic. We, at the vice chancellors and chancellor's level, have had numerous discussions about athletics and the pros and cons of athletics. Athletics brings in the door a number of students. Over 600 student athletes come through the doors that will have some impact, if we didn't have some of these teams, on our enrollment. But top it off, when you look at athletic budget, it's really three major pots of money. There's the GPR, the state funded, which is about $700,000. There is another significant portion called segregated fee money, which is about $600,000. And then the remaining of almost their $3 million budget is all because they raised the money through fundraising, donor contributions, contributors, ticket sales. So if we do replace the GPR and take the GPR out of athletics, we would have to reduce teams. And we have to reduce male teams because of Title IX. So that leaves us with really three major sports if we're talking about significant money. We're talking football, we're talking men's basketball, and men's hockey. Men's hockey is about to go into the Frozen Four for the second time in 2 years. Men's basketball won the national championship in 2015. And football has a huge impact in the fall of this community. And once again, we have wrestled through this. I think what you'll hear on this stage over and over again is that we've had numerous discussions over and over again how to remedy the situation. And we don't have a direct answer. But once again, everything got to be put on the table. Also, little plug for me, there is a forum. I think it's it's tax day, not April 15th, but April 17th. because they moved it back. April 17th is a Student Affairs Forum. I'm going to talk about the different pots of money and ways that we can try to resolve some of these matters. Thank you.
Awesome. So that concludes our time for the cards portion of this evening. So what we're going to do now is open it up to all of you to ask any last second questions that you can think from the last couple questions that were answered, as well as any concerns, any thoughts, or any suggestions for our administration to hear while going through this proposal. There is going to be a timer that's going to be set up on the screen. We're going to try and limit it to about 3 minutes a person. We think that's an adequate amount of time to ask either a really good question or to say a concise statement, so that we're being generous to everybody's time, because we don't want one person to take the time of many, as well as 8 o'clock tonight is when we do have to be done. So it's going to be a hard cutoff at 8 o'clock. But if you have any additional questions after that, feel free to reach out to any one of them, as well as SGA, or really anyone in administration will help you out and answer those questions. So I'll pass mics off. If you have a question or if you want to say anything, just raise your hand and we'll pass the mic around.
Hi, my name's Evelyn Thomas. I am a studio art and philosophy major here. So you touched a little bit on faculty before, but I'd like to delve a little bit further into the art department specifically. So Diane Bywaters and Susan Morrison are retiring. Grace Sippy's contract was not renewed, and Sean Salstrom found a job elsewhere. That is 4 faculty from the art department that are leaving us, and 14 classes that will not be offered in the fall, as well as 14 more in the spring. Not only will the less courses being affect our, education, but also this will up the class sizes of the courses that we still have available. This is concerning to me because I really do like Point and I want to stay here. So I'm wondering, what is your plan to address losing faculty, and why should us art students stay at Point?
I can speak to that a little bit. The dean has been working with the department all year to wrestle with their enrollment issues, and their enrollment has been declining. Among the things that she has been working with the faculty on is to change the teaching load a little bit. So I'm hopeful that the class sizes won't necessarily go up, but the teaching load of the faculty, particularly the studio faculty, for many years they were one of the few groups on campus that only taught 3 sessions, 3 classes per semester. The dean has asked them to move to a 4-4 load, as we call it, 4 classes per semester. So that will help to deal with the staffing issues. Some of the staff that you mentioned the academic staff person who was teaching glass. That has been one of those positions that was in part donor funded. It was never really an integrated part of the curriculum. It never had a solid budget underneath it. That's always been a struggle. And so the fact that we haven't been able to hang on to that is actually not surprising, given that it's never had full funding underneath it. It's never been sort of an integrated part of the curriculum. Just as Eric said, for the areas that he's working on, we're going to staff the curriculum that we have. And so as long as we have students in those programs, and again, they're not formally discontinued yet, we're going to continue to staff those classes and make sure that students have every opportunity to move forward and complete their degrees in a robust way.
I got the next question over here. Looking at the Regent 2024 policy, I see that the financial emergency is another option for laying off tenured faculty. And I was just wondering if you could speak to if that was considered, has it been considered, why it hasn't been the option we've gone with. And then my other question going along with that too is with the program discontinuation, we have, some of the programs being discontinued or proposed to be discontinued are some of the strongest in the state. Obviously, I know we're going to be talking about what those are going to look like in the future, but the proposal that we're looking at here is only going to get us about 40% of what we need to get with terms of our structural deficit anyway. So I worry that eventually we'll have a financial emergency if we don't already.
Maybe the chancellor wants to jump in here and talk about the financial emergency. I guess my take on that is simple, that to me a financial exigency is something outside of our control. The economy just tanks and suddenly our enrollment plunges for some reason that's external to the university. That's not exactly the case here. We certainly have financial problems, but they're absolutely and long have been under our control, and we simply haven't dealt with them. And so, I'm uncomfortable with calling it an exigency in the sense that it's not like an asteroid struck the planet and that's why we don't have enrollment. These have been issues that we've been aware of for years and simply haven't made the hard decisions to confront them.
I think we have to think about the national dialogue on this point. Right now, we want to position the university as changing courses, and that we plan and will provide a very solid education for all of the students that come here. That's a different message nationally than, oh my gosh, the ship is sinking, and that we're about to go under. When you declare a financial emergency, that's the conversation. And that can't be the conversation because that would hurt us even more so than changing courses with the curriculum, I think.
I'm Alexis Neely. I'm a senior English major. On Thursday, you presented a slide with some data about the most to least expensive majors at UWSP, and you're insisting on transparency in this progress, but half the graph was missing. The information I found was the profit or loss per SCH, and it shows that paper science costs $140 per SCH. So in the interest of transparency, I'm curious about how we can invest in these money-sucking programs when programs like English and sociology make the university money per SCH.
It's a fair question. I don't think half the graph was missing. That's actually a different graph. What I showed was the cost per major, and the graph that you're referring to, the data you're referring to, would be cost per SCH, and those are actually different cost numbers. Cost per SCH is what it costs to offer any course in a particular discipline, and the cost per major is actually usually a higher number, what it costs to actually deliver a degree in a particular discipline. And so they are slightly distinct. Both of them are transparently available on the IR Institutional Research website. That question about profitability comes up a lot. Any university needs majors that are less expensive than other majors, and so there's a lot of cross-subsidizing that goes on. And the point that I tried to make Thursday is that the kinds of subsidies that exist don't always show up in graphs like that. Yes, if you are in an English course, the cost of delivering those particular student credit hours is lower than in paper science. There's no question about that. That is absolutely true. But the fact that we have programs in particularly the liberal arts, which tend to be the less expensive things, they are only possible because of all the other students, the majority of students who actually come to the institution to study business, health, education, natural resources, right? In my own history department, if we only offered a history major, we would probably be relegated to 2 faculty members, maybe, something like that, because 95% of the students I ever taught as a history faculty member were non-majors. So when you're looking at the most important financial variable in terms of whether a program is cost-effective or not is the ability of that major to draw students to campus to enroll in that program. If we didn't have the business program with its 900 students and natural resources with their 1,600 or 1,800 or whatever the number is coming to campus, they wouldn't be, through the general education curriculum primarily and through minors and other things, showing up to all of those English, philosophy, history, and sociology classes that makes that kind of financial engine run. So the subsidies really go both ways, and they don't just show up in that one particular table.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Pio. I'm a theater design and technology major. I want to go back a while ago to the worth of a degree if your major is cut. And I kind of want to point out that the reputation of a university kind of gets a blow when it's been cutting its humanities in the national news. And an employer can look back and go, okay, you have a a sociology major and you want to be a guidance counselor, or an MFA or an MFA program can, not an MFA, MA program can look back at that and then look at the school and realize it doesn't exist and completely ignore any worth of the degree that was gotten because of that. And I just want to point out that that was not touched on. Like, that is an actual fear of people, that they will be completely rejected from any program they go to in the future because it doesn't seem to matter to the school that was offered it initially.
I understand your concern, and if I was in your seat, I probably would be asking the same question. What we know about the workforce, though, in this country, and particularly in this state, is there's going to be far more jobs than there are workers. We've already seen a crisis in IT and in healthcare, and it's only going to get worse. So you're going to be, all of you are going to be in a much better position about getting jobs than my generation was, for example. So I seriously doubt that an employer is going to be looking at your major and then checking back to see 5 years ago, did that major exist at that institution? That's just not what employers do, I don't think. So the workforce shortage is going to work in your advantage. It's going to work to everybody else's disadvantage because employers are not going to be able to find the workers they need to do the jobs that have to be done over the next 20 to 30 years. That's the demographics. That's part of the problem that we're facing now with the downturn in enrollment, is that trend has already started and it's hitting us now. It's going to hit the employers later. So if you've got a degree, I understand your concern. I just don't think it's going to be a concern for the employer.
I just want to make sure I understand the question right, so maybe you can straighten it out for me a bit. So is it a concern that if we discontinue a major, that a student goes out with a degree a couple years from now and it says sociology, and now the sociology degree doesn't exist at Stevens Point anymore, that there's a concern that it was never offered? I mean, I'm just repeat it for me, because I'm sorry.
There's a concern that it will be deemed as a not good program, that it will be deemed as because it was not worthy for the school to pay for it. And also, it's not just employment, it's also master's degree programs that are very difficult to get into, and they will look back at things like this.
Got it. Okay. I mean, again, thank you. I mean, first off, I guess what I would add to that is after, with years of advising my own students, I think it is what becomes critically important for folks looking at graduate programs quite often is the array of courses they take, the breadth of what they do, how they do on the GRE. There's a lot of things that go into that in terms of getting a master's degree. So I hear you, and I think we do need to be concerned that how this is going to look for the institution. I think there's a way we can make it sound and make it strong.
Hi, my name is Elena Kramer. I'm a double major in Spanish and acting. So in a lot of these discussions, you've said the restructuring is trying to focus on career preparation. The definition of a career is an occupation undertaken for a significant period of a person's life and with opportunities for progress. And I think that's about more than just getting a job. And so I would posit that any degree is preparation for a career. And I would just like to know why some careers are being treated as though they are more valid than others.
First of all, I'll take a stab at that. I agree with what you're saying. I have tried really hard to get the campus to think about this concept of career pathways as different than job training, right? Because I think the tech schools do a really good job of job training. I think universities actually do a much better job of career preparation and professional preparation. And career is more than a job. It's, to my mind, if universities like ours exist to help instill a passion for and the skills to pursue lifelong learning, that's exactly that's synonymous with career, right? Because careers are, every person has kind of an arc in their career. They might switch jobs 5 or 6 times, but their career will make sense to them. Each move is logical to that individual who makes it, and that sort of defines a career in much the way that you've talked about. So I absolutely agree with the premise of what you're saying. What we're finding, though, and this is not just true here, it is true at many universities, that the clarity of the career pathway for students is it affects the student enrollment that you get, and it affects the ability to persuade a student to come to a particular campus and to enroll in a particular major. And so as an advisor in history, I would routinely say, well, look at all the millions of things that you can do with a history degree, and that is a true statement. Students go on to do very successful things in 100 different professions, and they're not confined in that sense to any particular job, upon graduating the university. But that's a difficult conversation. It tends to often be a much more difficult conversation than things that have a little bit more clarity to not just the one pathway or the one job or the one vocation, but maybe the 3 or 4 career pathways that a particular program might open up. And so I will grant you that it's a little bit amorphous and it's a little bit nebulous, but we see this all across the country in terms of enrollments. I mean, in the history major, I think maybe enrollments are starting to bounce back up, but they have been in decline across the country at many, many institutions, and in part it's because of that rising debt issue that we talked about. And I think that's, again, I'll go back to public funding. I will absolutely go back to public funding. I think what is driving this to some extent is the more expensive a college degree has become for individual students and their family income, right? Not being subsidized by the state or by any public entity, but by having to come out of pocket, the more focused like a laser beam we see all of our prospective students on what's the return on investment. What am I going to make coming out of college? What am I going to make 10 years out of college? What are the 5 different careers I can possibly pursue with this? What are my options? I want to know my options. I want them to be concrete. And that conversation is one we hear repeatedly from prospective students and their families. And I think it's one that is evident in the data that we have shared with the campus.
I've got the next question over here. Dan Casey, Division of Communication graduate student. We've talked a lot about our structural deficit. Earlier it was mentioned that these cuts are going to get us to about 40% of our structural deficit. So I guess my question would be, where are we looking to get that additional 60%? And then also, what kind of consideration is being taken for the campuses whose structural deficits we will absorb here in the next 2 years? And what sort of assurances might we be able to have that when we do absorb those structural deficits, we won't go through another process like this where we talk about becoming further specialized, further niche? I know I've heard you defend several times that we're not becoming a tech school, but how do we guarantee that in 2 years' time we're not looking at further specializing and then cutting other related programs?
Those are all good questions. There's been so much focus on the point forward proposal and the program eliminations that people are losing sight of the dozens and dozens and dozens of other budget decisions that we make all the time. And so we've been working all year on a budget plan across the division, and not just within academic affairs, but part of that $4.5 million is coming from the other units on campus in student affairs and in business affairs in particular. Kristen Hendrickson, our chief business officer, talked about how she is dealing with her particular budget cut. So all of those numbers are hopefully going to add up to that $4.5 million that we need to get to. Within my own division, I can just run through several examples. We've had to make a budget reduction again in information technology this year. I can't quite recall. I think it's about $180,000 is the number that's coming out of information technology. That's on the heels of them having lost 9.5 positions over the previous 3 years, I think. I can't cut them anymore. University College took a budget reduction of a similar magnitude this year, about $180,000. When this gentleman left his study abroad director's position, we cut that position in its entirety out of the international office, and we reorganized that entire operation to try and achieve some further budget reductions. So there are those kinds of reductions going on all across the division, and not just in the departments affected by an eliminated major, but in other departments too, where there have been enrollment declines that simply don't justify filling a position, for example. And we've had to eliminate some positions that are filled in other units as well. So there are a lot of different pieces to this. And trust me, we're trying to avoid the elimination of majors. We worked very hard to try to avoid that as much as we could. We only resorted to this because strategically we felt like it was going to weaken the rest of the campus too much if we didn't pursue this strategy. And we've done that for years on end. So I hope that begins to explain where the rest of the numbers are coming from. To the college's structural deficit, maybe the chancellor wants to jump in here a little bit. you're right, it's a significant issue, and the one thing I know for certain is that we can't predict the future with certainty. Our intent is to put new programs in place on those campuses, to work with our faculty and their existing faculty to diversify the offerings that are there to draw enrollment. I mean, the only real hope is to draw enrollment to those campuses.
Well, you said just what I was about to say, Greg. We're watching this like a hawk. They do have structural deficits, and they're much worse on those campuses than they are here. And so we're trying to keep a very close eye on that. There are, of course, no promises or guarantees for the future. Our plan is to have new programs there. What programs can we expand from this campus to those campuses? Because if they prosper, we do as well. So we want to see them do well because they're going to be part of us. We're going to be all one university come July the 1st. But if we can grow enrollment there, that helps the mothership right here. But yes, we're absolutely concerned about that and watching it quite closely.
Hi, my name is Caleb Baton. I have a very interesting relationship with the university. I'm an alumnus, a current student. I've worked for the university for 4 years now, and I am a president of the University Writers Club, as well as last semester as president of Court of Stone Press, which the chancellor touched on earlier, so thank you for that. The reason that I wanted to talk today was through the meetings that we've been having so far, the one subject that I've never heard any touch on is the clubs that are available on campus. And I just had a prepared thing I want to read for you real quick. Also, thank you for letting us do this. I know it's really hard to sit up there and listen to us talk at you just as much as it's hard for us to get lectured at, but I wanted to thank you for that. So here's my thing. Though the proposed cuts do not distinctly affect the clubs at UWSP, we can assume that some changes would occur, if for no other reason than the decrease in teaching staff that could result in a decrease in available advisors. Currently, most professors are already advising as many clubs as they can, and it is unlikely that these overextended professionals would be able to take on the extra workload caused by this proposed change. The clubs at this university play just as significant a role in the students' lives as their classroom activities, and are in some cases, the reason why some students stay at UWSP instead of changing schools. Without these clubs or extracurricular programs, I would propose that retention numbers of students would decrease, though I admit I do not have any data to back this up other than several years of experience working for the campus activities and student engagement office, being a current president, a student, and things like of that nature. With all of that said, has there been any discussion about the future of clubs on campus, and if so, what changes would we as students expect to see? Thank you.
You're absolutely right about the value of those activities, just not clubs, but other activities across campus. The more students are engaged, the more likely they are to persist with their education. We know that. There's research study after research study that affirms that very point. There hasn't been any that I'm aware of, any specific discussion about clubs per se, but our Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs is sitting right over there. I know he's probably going to touch on this at his forum in April. Anything you want to add, Al?
You're right that there might be less advisors, there might be less clubs and organizations, but we just don't know yet. I honestly don't know that answer because it's the student body that generates the clubs and organizations. How they stay engaged will be critical through CASE, through the office of CASE, to see how we continue to have as many clubs and organizations. One of the things about Point you need to be quite proud of. You have by far the most engaged student body I've ever worked with. A group of students who are truly embedded and believe in this university, who their alums believe in this university. You should be quite proud of what you have. And we're not going to try to lose it. But every step we make, there's always going to be a pro and con to it. But we have to study it first.
Just remember that we have about 120 student orgs. About 150, which is a big number. That's great. I'm glad we got that many. Even higher.
More than 200.
We have between 900 and 1,000 employees. Between 900 and 1,000 employees. So we shouldn't have any issues going forward, even if we had some reduction in the workforce here, to have advisors for student orgs. That shouldn't be a problem.
I just wanted to follow that up real quickly, because one of the requirements for a club to be on the university is that they have a faculty staff advisor. And through the professors and things that I've already talked to, they're already advising 3, 4, 7, 10 clubs. And that's a lot for a professor to do that and all of their school prep and all that stuff too. So that's just my concern, is if we reduce the number already, and we're already really overworked for some of our advisors, what effect could that be? And I'm glad that you're going to touch on that in April.
We'll touch on it in April, but more importantly, knowing that faculty are advising 6 or 7 clubs, we need to work on that now so we can reduce that as well.
Yeah, that's the problem. Remember, we have, as I said a minute ago, between 900 and 1,000 employees. And there may be a lot of employees out there who would love to be involved, don't know that the opportunities exist or even if they're allowed. So we need to promote that on campus for sure.
Hi there, my name is Michael Trader. I'm a music education student here. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for listening to us, and thank you for involving us. I know you probably feel like the least popular people on campus right now, but we do know you're trying, and we do know you're fighting for us, and it does mean a lot. I wanted you to know that. So my question comes out of concern for my fellow future teachers, in that we're cutting majors that are very popular for teaching positions. History, English, all the foreign languages that are being cut are sought after teaching positions. And so I'm wondering, for the school administrators out there who are hiring teachers, and they see that we have a degree from UWSP on our resume, how is UWSP going to assure that our teaching certifications are as strong as any other university? How are we going to assure that we have the same quality education as those who have those strong majors?
Good question, actually, and I with Point being such a strong teachers college, training educators, it's hardwired into our system here, and we got to be careful about it. I'm engaging sort of on a every other day sort of conversation with School of Education on how do we do that. We have to make sure that whatever we do with these majors in these areas, that if we're still going to do certifications in languages or certifications, for teaching social studies, that we're doing the right thing. Provost, Greg had mentioned, earlier, the DPI is looking at, and the state level, changing up some of those recommendations, and quite frankly, we're kind of worried about some of those recommendations because they seem to be pretty serious watering down of teacher preparation, and so we really want to see how we're going to do the best job we can, hopefully do better than than we're hearing from the state level in terms of teacher prep. So I guess my short answer is we're going to be engaging with the SOE, School of Education, through this whole process to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
I'm going to say something that's going to scare my colleagues in education and probably make me even less popular. One of the new ideas that is being discussed at the system level, it is possible, I think, I've always been concerned with how our education programs are structured here on campus, because we tend to wait. You enroll in a program, and in history, the major is an option, but it's not required. You can get a minor, you get the social science major for teacher certification. But what's true of most of our education programs is you don't teach until maybe you're done with your junior year, right? That's when you go out and student teach. There's a lot of evidence from other states that that's not a good way to do it. You often don't find out whether you have the dispositions to stand in front of a class of 8-year-olds or 14-year-olds and to teach them until you actually step in front of a class and you do that work. And so we have a lot of students that will go down that path of teaching. They get to the student teaching after their junior year, and they're like, holy cow, I don't want to ever do this again. And then what do? They've spent all that time preparing for a career that suddenly is just not possible. A lot of states have begun to explore a model where you put student teachers in front of students right away after the first year. You get them in the curriculum, you get them in front of a classroom, you work with them, and what it also does is it cuts down the time from 5 to 4 years, which is a major savings for students. You get better qualified teachers who are more passionate about that particular career, feel better in it, and you also save them a year of the expense. So when I said that there are significant conversations happening within the UW system about the model that we use for teacher prep, I mean that they are significant and they could bring real changes and I think potentially real improvements to the kind of pathways that we create for teachers. So it's something to keep tracking. I'm not saying we're moving down that road, but it's a conversation that's happening at the system level, and I think we could see some changes in the state that are really very positive for students.
I'm glad to hear the provost say that. I mentioned earlier that I was in arts and sciences for a number of years, actually 25 years. The last 9 as the dean of arts and sciences at Georgia College. And Greg, that's exactly the kind of program we put in place there. It's called a field-based teacher education program. We had students as freshmen getting experiences in the classroom. And so there's a lot of merit to that approach, and I would encourage our School of Education to look carefully at that model.
Hi, Dylan Gribbentrog, Political Science and Communication PR. So my question is related to the department's proposed plans, because I know you guys had asked departments to come up with plans. I'm not sure that was specifically their department or like the entire university. But I guess also things that I've heard from professors within the proposed majors being cut, that their proposed plan was not listened to or taken into consideration. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And also if there's a way that we can access and see those proposed plans that were given by each of the departments whose majors were proposed being cut?
Yeah, I had asked the departments in the College of Letters and Science to work up plans and get them to me by February 1st. And all the departments did that. I also opened it up and said, if individuals in the departments want to put forward plans, they can do that as well. So we did a whole kind of a collecting process that actually we started the conversation back in December to try to shoot for February 1st, and I wanted it out there so that we had the month of February to kind of pull in those ideas, look at them, get them out so that the provost could look at them, that sort of thing. So we pulled them together. What sort of slowed things down a bit in terms of communication, and I'll call it that. So a slowdown in communication was once the proposal started coming in. 2 things became very clear to me very quickly. One was I could not put them out like into an open folder for everybody because some departments were talking about other departments and some departments were talking about individuals, so there were personnel issues. And so I went to the chairs at the next meeting. I said, okay, I've got your proposals. We're looking at the proposals. You can decide with whom you want to share it. So you have my permission. I mean, it's because it's your proposal. You can share it out, but I'm not going to share it out. I'm gonna make sure that you do that. So certainly feel free to ask in your departments what was the proposal that they put forward February 1st, and you kind of see some of the ideas. I will say too that some of the departments put together some really neat ideas. I mean, there really are some good ideas. The issue is that I think, as the chancellor mentioned up front, when you put them all down on paper, it actually would require more money and more positions rather than less. And so I wanted to be kind of careful not to kind of put that out there and say, hey, we got a great alternative proposal, because I couldn't make that thing kind of cram into the budget that we're working with. So the way I left it with the chairs was, we're going to move forward with a provost curricular plan for the campus, and we're going to pull out those plans now and start looking at how we could work them in relationship to the current proposal. Okay, so they didn't go away. They kind of went to a little silent period, but certainly do feel free. And I've actually asked the departments that if they want to even tweak their plans, in light of what's on, or they had more time to think about it, to go ahead and do that as well. But don't hesitate to ask the chair and poli-sci or for a copy of it. Because quite frankly, I really like some of the ideas they had.
My name is Michael Reynolds. I'm an environmental ethics and poli-sci major. Some of my best professors are not tenured. So I'm just wondering going forward as you eliminate staff, if you're going to look more based on skill or on tenure.
It's a really good question, by the way. Really good. The reason it's a really good question is because when I kept bombarding the provost with different proposals last fall to cut the budget, across the board, different things. One thing that you all should know is that if we have to work with current law and current statute policy, the only place I can really cut are assistant professors. I mean, because they're on 1-year, 2-year contracts, and I can non-renew, and that can save me money, right? So when we kind of went through, I don't know, iteration 15 or whatever, Greg's getting sick of it, I was getting sick of it too, but what we finally got to is I went to the departments at the end of November, beginning December, and I said, here's the situation. If we don't go down this path of reorganization and discontinuation, then I have to expose all of our assistant professors. And again, I think a lot of you probably know this, but when a lot of the departments over the last 5, 6, 10 years have been hiring assistant professors, those have often been cases where they lost 2 positions and they had to bring it down. They had room to hire 1. They were making very hard strategic plans about those younger faculty, and those folks really are the future of those programs. And I think, as you might have also witnessed, there's some fabulous teachers, instructors, and younger faculty. So I did not want to reorganize on the backs of the assistant professors. I really wanted this to be something where we were looking at exactly what you said. Let's look at the whole program. If there are folks that are looking to retire, if there are sort of areas that we're going to phase out and move in other directions, so that we weren't just sort of engaging in a let's just have a lost generation. That has happened in academia in the past, by the way. There have been times when universities went through downsizes, and there's kind of this in the late 70s, right? The late 70s is often referred to by especially historians and others as the lost generation, because there's a whole group of assistant professors who simply lost their jobs, in that budget exercise, trying not to go down that path. So I totally agree with you.
I would just add that the 3 of us virtually have no say about which faculty members might be selected for layoff. Yes. Look at, again, we keep referring to Regents Policy 2004. You'll see in there that it specifically assigns to the faculty the responsibility of establishing the seniority system that will be followed. And that's done to prevent provosts and deans and chancellors from picking somebody out there. You're a bit of a problem over there. We think you're going to be the one to go. So that's to safeguard our faculty from having somebody like the 3 of us just identify somebody that we may not agree with.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Sims. I am a geoscience major and I have a minor in GIS. Coming into college, I was a biology major, hated it, so I was bouncing around natural resources, couldn't find what I liked until I found geoscience. That's one part. Second part, I know that for the exploratory learning, you need to have natural science, only 3 credits, and the geography course offered is 5 credits, and it kind of sucks, to be honest. My question is, did you look at reorganizing the curriculum before and advertising the department as a whole more before you decided to cut the program as a whole?
Okay, so you mean in terms of geoscience and
Geoscience and geography, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll try to answer it, and then if you can follow up if I don't hit the mark. So, in one sense I feel bad, but in another sense I feel actually pretty good about having gone and spoke with the geography and geoscience group like first thing last fall. And the reason that I feel bad is because it really puts so much pressure on them, to kind of have them right in the crosshairs and to feel like they're the first ones out front having to face what we're now looking at for the whole campus. Why I feel like it was kind of a good thing for all of us was, I will say, for one thing, they put in one of the best proposals and most complete proposals on February 1st than anybody else did, I think, because they were really ready for it. Having said that, what we looked at was, again, a combination of factors, and again, some of them are internal dynamics that obviously I wouldn't want to get into in an open forum, but we have on the one hand some opportunities to build out with the faculty in geographic information systems and science, and in geoscience. And one of the things that we've been kind of engaging with the geoscientists has been, can we look at expanding environmental science and environmental studies and kind of use them as, use their expertise as a way of building in that direction. So we've actually been talking with them about different ways that we could move forward and hopefully strengthen and get more students in fields where they're teaching. Okay, I think the other part of it is we did look at the numbers in the program, and that was kind of that's a tough thing to have to do. And I know that Greg's been very good in talking to the faculty about this, and I've been trying to too, that we weren't going to simply sort of draw a line and say any major where they have less than this X number of students therefore is on the chopping block. We had to look at lots of different factors, and that involved everything from what courses are they servicing to other majors? What are the potential growth areas that we might be able to get the faculty involved in? What are their endowments? Like what kind of money's coming in? Things like that all had to kind of come into that discussion, and we were discussing that when we came forward to the folks in geography and geoscience last fall. So they're certainly part of the whole mix of what's going on right now. But that's kind of part of what we were really grappling with when we started talking with them in August. So I hope I answered the question.
All right, I wanted to ask one more question from the basket because this one was really meaningful to me, and I believe Vice Chancellor Thompson touched on some of this already about how wonderful our student body is here. So Poynter students have shown up in record numbers in the last few weeks, trying to learn more and to understand. Something that really concerns me is student pride and a sense of belonging in their university. We understand that morale is down, but what is your best advice to give to students regarding their pride in UWSP and their sense of belonging, and that their degree from Point is not a waste?
Okay, I guess I'll start in. So a couple of things. Yeah, all of us have been thinking about this quite a bit. First off, do stay engaged in the process. Ask the questions, get to your departments. Let's talk about alternatives, proposals, how to really build the future of UWSP. I think that's a key thing, and we want folks engaged in that process all the way through. I think that's the first one. Secondly, I trust a lot in our faculty. We have an awful lot of excellent folks. You know that too. We're going to come up with good ideas here. We're going to come up with some really good alternatives and ways of pulling together. Work with your faculty. I think they're going to need that kind of support and understanding as they go through this process as well. So I think that those things to me are the kind of things that really show what Pointers are all about and what you guys are about. So stay engaged.
I want to maybe pick up on, to answer that question, the point you made about being asked to take a 5-credit class for a 3-credit requirement, because I want to point the students in particular back to the general education curriculum. None of us want to be in this position as a university to be in debt and having to let programs go. We've kind of let these decisions accumulate over decades. We should have dealt with this sooner. We didn't, so here we are. None of us want to be here. But I would point out that we have an opportunity, even if we didn't want it, to do something really creative and innovative on this campus. And that is to reinvent general education, because general education is a problem at nearly every university in the country. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. The curriculums, and remember, this is a third of your curriculum. We ask you to take, we require you to take 40 or so credits out of your 120 in a curriculum that has nothing to do, right? This is what I hear back from students all the time. It has nothing to do with my major, right? That's the liberal education core of every baccalaureate degree in the country. And yet, if you read the literature of higher education, and there's books and reports, and you could fill shelves with the condemnations of the failings of general education, because we ask you to take kind of a random selection of courses from a group of disciplines. We don't connect those courses, to one another. They're not problem-based typically. They tend to be lecture-based. They're not small classes. They tend to be large. I can go on and on and on. They're major classes, yet 96% of the students in those classes are non-majors, and yet they're taught as if they're introductions to the major, because they have to be to serve the 5 students in the class that actually are getting an intro to the major. All of those things are fundamental problems with the core liberal arts curriculum of the university. We need your input as students to reshape that thing. Because as faculty, we've kind of swung and missed at it, frankly. The curriculum has been successful as an efficiency instrument. It's getting you through the curriculum faster because it's got fewer credits. But as an innovative piece of teaching and learning, I don't think it's where it needs to be. And there's not many universities in the country that have figured this out. There are some innovative models out there that we can go look at. There are some universities that are on the cutting edge and they've done good things. But we could lead that conversation in this state. We could lead that conversation to some extent in the nation and be really proud of the accomplishments that we achieve through that. I mean, if we could produce a meaningful liberal education, not just for philosophy majors, right? That's valuable and I get that. But what if we could do that for every single student who comes here in a meaningful way and we could actually back it up? That's an opportunity that is a rare opportunity. And frankly, I would love to have student input. What do you want from those 40 credits? What kind of experience do you want? We need that kind of input. I am about to send out a call to the campus, I hope, later this week about this very topic. And it needs not just faculty input, it needs student input. You got to talk to people and give us your thoughts about what you want from that 1/3 of your curriculum, which is expensive, right? It can't be a waste of your time. And I think too many students look at it in just that way right now, and that's a shame.
Let me go back as we wrap up tonight to the question about pride in this institution. We've already said how engaging the student body is. It is the most engaging student body I've worked with as well. And our SGA has the best leadership over the last several years than any I've ever worked with in my 42-year career. And so you're doing the right thing. You're showing up. You're asking questions. You're reading reports. You're looking at the website. And you're doing what you should do. I hope you get some satisfaction out of that. But let me suggest that there's some things we shouldn't do. I've seen postings on social media from alums who say, well, we understand budget cuts and we understand less state support and all that. It's not the school's fault. And then in the next breath, they advocate direct action intended to specifically punish this institution. Why would people do that? Why would they set out to make it worse than it already is? To actually punish, I guess they can't punish the elected officials and they can't punish the demographics, so they want to punish somebody, so they're reaching out to the very place that they love, they profess to love, and what it did for them as students here. I'll share this story too. Maybe I shouldn't, but I will, because I think it's wrong-headed. This comes to me third hand, so it's probably quite different than what I heard. But a tour was walking through campus today of prospective students, and somebody ran out and said to them, why would you ever want to come here? That just makes it worse. I just am at a loss to describe how I feel about somebody who is so angry that they want to hurt an institution. I understand why they would be mad at me or the dean or the provost. That I expect. But to be mad at the university and to take actions to specifically harm the university. I love this place, as I know you do. In fact, that you're sitting here tonight tells me you wouldn't do that, but some have. So I would just remind us of all the great things this university stands for. I signed a letter just today congratulating an alum on his next position. CEO of 3M, an international corporation. I was just emailing with another alum. He's now a lieutenant general in the U.S. Army. That's 3 stars. He's the G2 for the Army. I mean, the Army. We have alums that have won Emmys. We have alums that have started companies. We have alums that have started multiple companies. And we have alums that serve this community and this state and this nation by just going to work every day as social workers, as foresters, as accountants. And they're making a difference in their communities and in their churches and in their synagogues and in their mosques because they learned that sense of servant leadership right here on this campus. That's what I'm proud of. Whether you're in the headlines with your career or if you're the teacher teaching 5th grade, every one of them is making a difference. There are 77,000 alums from this university, and they're all out doing what you will be doing, making this a better place, a better world. That's what I'm proud of, and I hope you are too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What I want to do is I want to do this a little bit out of order. So could all of you please give a round of applause to yourselves for showing up today? Just like the chancellor was saying, decisions are made by those who show up. And so it's really important to get involved, to get engaged, and to be a part of this process so we can learn this together as well as make decisions together. So with that, going back into order, let's give a round of applause to panelists up here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for doing that. As your SGA representative and many other SGA representatives here, yes, we're going to be keeping the pressure to make sure that we're doing what is right for students, because maybe it is the right plan, maybe it's not. But we're going to find that out and make sure that whatever's done is done for the best of students now and for the future. So if you have any concerns, any questions, comments, concerns that were not expressed tonight, please reach out to either one of them or to SGA. It's really simple. SGA@uwsp.edu. Put in your concern, put in your question. We will make sure that it gets answered. Maybe we won't get back to you right away, but we'll make sure that that question comes to either a forum like this or that they hear it so that they can publicly give an answer to that question. Other than that, thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful night, and yeah, have a wonderful night. Go Pointers. There you go.